When we contemplate the shadow of solitude, we must remember that Jungian psychology does not merely concern itself with outer facts, but with the symbolic, the archetypal, the great drama of the soul, and in this respect, the solitary woman, the one who has chosen or has been chosen by destiny to walk without the conventional tether of marriage or male partnership, stands as a profound emblem of individuation itself, for her path is not simply a path of isolation, but of confrontation with the depths of psyche, the voice of the anima within, and the countless projections society casts upon her silence, her independence, and her enigmatic strength. And when we turn our gaze toward the figure of the woman who lives alone without a man, we discover not an absence, but an extraordinary presence, a fullness that appears paradoxical to those who have been conditioned to see value only in the reflected light of union. She becomes not a void, but a vessel, not an abandonment, but a becoming. For solitude in Jung's understanding is not the negation of relationship, but a deeper descent into relationship with the self, that eternal partner whose voice we often drown with noise, distractions, or the illusions of external validation here. In the silence of her dwelling, the woman begins to hear that inner partner, the self, whispering in dreams, stirring in symbols, arising in those subtle synchronicities that weave her life into the larger fabric of archetypal truth. She is confronted by the anima and animus within. She no longer seeks her complement in the figure of a man, because the psychic drama has turned inward, calling her to reconcile the contrasexual other that dwells in the unconscious, and Jung knew that this confrontation was perilous. It could devour her in loneliness or inflate her in false self-sufficiency, yet it could also transform her into one who embodies both her feminine roots and the masculine clarity of logos, one who becomes a bridge between instinct and spirit, between eros and logos, and thus the solitary woman is never merely alone, she is engaged in the secret alchemy of soul work, which the outer world, too, often misinterprets as isolation or misfortune. Society projects upon her countless shadows. Some call her incomplete, others suspicious, still others dangerous, because she defies the collective expectation that a woman must find wholeness only in a man. But the psyche is older than society, and the archetypes are stronger than conventions. And so the solitary woman embodies something timeless, the echoes of the Sibyl, the priestess, the wise crone who knew that solitude is the crucible in which the deeper self is forged. She does not flee the world, but she chooses another axis of meaning, an axis invisible to the many who fear silence, and thus she walks a path that is both profoundly human and profoundly archetypal, reminding us that the truth about the woman who lives alone without a man is not a tale of lack, but a revelation of an inner fullness that cannot be seen by eyes still blinded by collective prejudice. For it is always easier to label the unknown as deficient than to acknowledge that it may be secretly superior. The woman in solitude stands as a mirror to the collective unconscious, and the collective averts its gaze, because in her we see our own fear of being alone, our own terror of facing the shadow without distraction. And so society will always weave stories around her. Some pity her, some envy her, some demonize her, yet none of these projections capture the essence of her truth, because her truth is not reducible to a role she is playing in the collective play. Her truth belongs to the self, and to that mystery which Jung called individuation, the long, arduous process by which one becomes whole, not by acquiring another, but by integrating the opposites within herself. And the solitary woman embodies this process more nakedly than most, for she has not the protective veil of conventional partnership to conceal the inner drama, and so her life becomes transparent to archetype. She walks visibly with her shadow. She converses with her inner animus. She learns to balance the eros of her nature with the logos of clarity, and thus she incarnates a form of wholeness that threatens those who live still in dependence upon others. For definition, she shows that one may live, and not only survive, but thrive, without external validation from a man, because the validation comes from the archetypal self, that center which is at once deeply personal and yet universally human. And if one listens carefully, one can hear in her story the mythic voices of those who came before the virgins of the temple, not virgins in the sense of sexual denial, but virgins in the original meaning, whole unto themselves, belonging not to man but to the gods, and in that belonging they drew their strength and wisdom. So to the modern solitary woman without a man is not deprived, but consecrated. Though the collective cannot see it, she is living out an ancient archetype hidden beneath layers of modern misunderstanding, and in her quiet room, in her long walks, alone in her dreams that swirl with strange figures, she is participating in the eternal dance of psyche and self-shadow and light, eros and logos. And though her neighbors may whisper and her relatives may sigh, though the culture may cast her as tragic or strange, she is, in truth, closer to the deep center than many who appear outwardly fulfilled. For to sit with one's self in solitude is a task few undertake willingly, and fewer still endure to the end. But she has taken that road, whether by choice or by fate, and she has become thereby not less, but more, and her life, though invisible to many, testifies to a truth Jung never tired of declaring, that the goal of existence is not adaptation to the outer norm, but realization of the inner whole. The solitary woman embodies this goal in its rawest form. She is the question, the riddle, the oracle posed to a society that fears its own unconscious, and in her silence she teaches us that wholeness is not dependent upon another, but upon integration within. And so the truth about women who live alone without a man is not a simple sociological statement, it is a psychic revelation. It is an archetype unfolding in our midst, and those with eyes to see will recognize her not as incomplete, but as a symbol of the possible future of humanity, a future where men and women alike may find wholeness not through dependency, but through the courage to face their own solitude, and discover in that solitude the eternal self that waits in the depths of psyche. When we turn again to the figure of the woman who lives alone without a man, we must go deeper into the archetypal layers, for what the collective mind misnames loneliness is in fact a confrontation with the self, a return to the inner fire that burns beneath all external masks. And Jung would remind us that every image of solitude is double. It contains both shadow and light, both danger and promise, and the solitary woman bears this doubleness within her fate. She may indeed fall into the abyss of isolation, into bitterness, into despair, because the absence of outer companionship can awaken the devouring voices of the unconscious. And yet, if she dares to face these voices, if she resists the temptation to escape through distraction or through frantic search for validation, she enters into the territory of individuation, and in this territory, the feminine soul discovers itself, not through compliance with an outer role, but through the encounter with archetypal figures that rise from the depths of the collective unconscious. For the woman who lives without a man must sooner or later encounter her own animus, that inner masculine energy which may at first appear as critical, as oppressive, as demanding, but which when integrated becomes the very source of clarity, discernment, and inner strength. And it is this alchemical process which makes her solitude a sacred fire rather than a barren desert. She becomes acquainted with the voices of her dreams, the forgotten gods who still speak in symbols, and she learns that her path is less about escaping loneliness than about transforming it into communion with the depths. And we must be honest that this path is not romanticized. It is not easy, because the collective has surrounded the solitary woman with projections that make her task doubly heavy. She is pitied by those who cannot imagine life without external validation. She is envied by those who secretly long for the freedom she embodies. She is feared by those who sense in her a power that cannot be domesticated, and all these projections she must carry in addition to her own psychic work. But in this crucible she becomes stronger than most, for she learns to distinguish between projection and reality, between the voices of others and the voice of the self. She becomes able to say, "I am alone, yet I am whole," and such a declaration is revolutionary, for it undermines the collective lie that a woman's identity is fulfilled only in relation to a man. Jung taught that every individual must face the task of becoming whole, which means reconciling the opposites within. And the solitary woman faces this task in its most transparent form. She cannot hide in the shadow of partnership. She must meet her inner opposites directly, and it is here that the archetype of the wise woman emerges from the depths of mythology. In ancient tales, we see her, the priestess, the witch, the oracle, she who stands at the margins of society but holds the key to its mysteries. And in the modern world, this archetype lives again in the woman who dares to live without the conventional tether of a man, not because she despises men, nor because she is incapable of love, but because her psyche has demanded another path, one that leads into the silence of self. And if we are honest, we must admit that her life terrifies the collective, because it mirrors to all of us the possibility that we too might one day be stripped of external supports and left face to face with the self, and most would rather flee than face such nakedness. But she has faced it, and in facing it she becomes teacher, though she does not set out to teach. By example she reveals that love for the self is not narcissism, but necessity, that solitude is not absence, but a vessel of transformation, and that wholeness does not depend on being chosen by another, but on choosing to integrate the shadow, the animus, the inner depths. She is in truth a pioneer of consciousness, carrying within her the weight of the collective's projections, yet slowly transmuting them through her own psychic struggle. And in this sense she serves not only herself, but the larger process of humanity's individuation. She becomes an image of the future, a future where men and women alike will be asked to step beyond dependency into authentic self-realization. And though she may live in a small apartment, though she may walk alone through the city streets, though she may cook for one and sleep in an empty bed, she is not empty, for within her psyche a great drama unfolds. A drama in which the gods themselves take part, where archetypes battle for dominance, where the self slowly reveals its face, and if she perseveres, she emerges. Not diminished but enlarged, she becomes one whose presence radiates a subtle strength that others cannot explain, but feel. She becomes a vessel of wisdom, and paradoxically, even as she lives without a man, she may find herself surrounded by deeper forms of relationship, not of dependency, but of authenticity, for people are drawn to the radiance of one who has faced the depths alone and returned. And thus her solitude becomes generative. It bears fruit not only for herself, but for her community, because she embodies what Jung called the individuation process in visible form. She is the living proof that one can survive the fire of solitude and emerge with a greater self. And so, the truth about the woman who lives alone without a man is not merely psychological, it is symbolic. It tells us that humanity is being called to grow beyond its projections, to recognize that every individual carries within the potential for wholeness, without depending on another for definition. Her life may look ordinary to the outer eye, but in the inner world it is heroic. She is wrestling with angels and demons. She is reconciling eros and logos. She is weaving the opposites into a new tapestry of being. And though she may at times feel the sting of loneliness, though she may long for companionship, though she may weep at night, she knows at a deeper level that her path is chosen by the self, and that in this path she is not abandoned but accompanied by the archetypes, by the living currents of the collective unconscious that flow through her, and so she becomes a mystery to the world, a question mark, a paradox. She is alone yet full, she is without a man yet not without wholeness, she is denied by the collective yet consecrated by the self, and in this paradox lies her truth, the truth that terrifies and liberates, that destroys illusion and opens the way to individuation. And therefore, when we speak of the woman who lives alone without a man, we must not speak with pity or with condescension, but with reverence, for she is walking a path that few dare to walk, and in her courage she shows us all that the way to the self, though narrow and difficult, is possible, and it is this possibility that is the hidden gift of her solitude. It is the message she carries silently to a world still ensnared in projection, the message that wholeness is within, that the self awaits in the depths, that one can live alone and yet not be empty, but be full of the radiance of the inner fire. When we arrive at the final contemplation of the woman who lives alone without a man, we must recognize that her image is not merely personal but collective, not merely a circumstance of biography, but a symbol of the evolution of consciousness itself. Jung taught that the psyche is not static, but moves in rhythms and ages each epoch, bringing forth new symbols to meet the demands of the time. And in our age, when the old forms of relationship falter and the old securities crumble, the solitary woman emerges as a living emblem of what humanity must learn about the self. She stands not as an anomaly, but as a harbinger of what is to come, and her solitude is not simply her own, but an anticipation of the solitude that every soul must one day face when the outer structures fail and only the inner self remains. The collective calls her incomplete, because the collective has not yet recognized that completion lies not in the arms of another, but in the union of conscious and unconscious, in the integration of shadow and light, of eros and logos, of anima and animus within the psyche. The solitary woman embodies this integration in its raw and visible form, and therefore she is not to be pitied but to be revered, for she is living the myth of individuation openly for all to see. Though most do not see, they avert their gaze or distort her meaning, because the sight of her unsettles the deep foundations of their assumptions about love, about wholeness, about life itself. But those who dare to see will glimpse in her the archetype of the self emerging through the feminine form. She is Persephone, who has descended into the underworld, not by abduction, but by destiny, and in her descent she has discovered that the underworld is not only terror, but treasure. She is Inanna, stripped of her garments at the gates of the abyss, descending naked into the realm of death and emerging transformed into queen. She is the Virgin Mary in her original symbolic sense, the one who is whole unto herself, bearing the divine not through union with a man, but through union with the Spirit. Within, she is all these images at once, for archetypes are many-faced, and the solitary woman carries them in her psyche, whether she knows it or not, and thus her life is myth enacted in the present tense. And Jung would remind us that myth is the language of the unconscious. It is how the deep self reveals itself to consciousness. So when we see the solitary woman, we are seeing myth embodied, a living myth that speaks of humanity's future, for, in truth, the age of dependency is waning, the age of projection is ending. We are being called to find wholeness within, so that relationships may be built not on need, not on projection, but on authentic recognition of the other as self-realized and free. And the woman who lives alone without a man is the frontier of this possibility. She is the forerunner, the pioneer. She bears the burden of misunderstanding, so that others may one day walk more freely into individuation. She endures loneliness, so that future generations may see solitude not as curse, but as gift. She embodies the pain of projection, so that consciousness may evolve beyond it. and thus her role, though unseen, is vast. She is serving the self not only for herself but for the collective, for humanity itself, and if we have the eyes to perceive, we will see that her small apartment, her solitary meals, her long evenings alone are not empty rituals of deprivation, but sacred rites of individuation. Each night she sits with her shadow, each morning she awakens to her dreams. She learns to read the symbols that arise within her. She learns to hold the tension of opposites. She learns to wait for the self to speak. And in doing so, she teaches us all that the self is real, that it is not an idea but a presence that guides and transforms, and this is the truth that society resists because it undermines the entire edifice of dependency and projection. But the truth will not be silenced. The solitary woman embodies it, and it shines through her, whether she wishes or not. For archetypes are stronger than personal will. They use us as vessels, and in her case, she has become the vessel of the archetype of individuation, and so she carries a heavy fate, but also a luminous destiny. She is misunderstood, and yet she is essential. For through her, the collective psyche is being drawn forward into a new stage of consciousness, one where both men and women will be asked to live not from fear of solitude, but from communion with the self. And thus we must honor her not as an outcast, but as an oracle. Her life, though ordinary in appearance, is extraordinary in meaning. It is myth in motion, it is psyche revealed, and so the final truth about the woman who lives alone, without a man, is this: she is not alone, for she lives with the self. She is not incomplete, for she embodies the union of opposites. She is not pitiable, for she is heroic. She is the visible image of the invisible journey that awaits us all, the journey into the depths, the confrontation with shadow, the integration of anima and animus, the birth of the self, and in her courage to live this journey openly, she becomes a gift to the world. Though the world rarely recognizes it, she is the question mark that destabilizes the collective lie. She is the seed of a future where wholeness is discovered, not in dependence but in individuation. She is the mirror we avoid yet need. She is the embodiment of the eternal truth that to live alone is not to be abandoned but to be consecrated to the self. And therefore, let us no longer speak of her with pity but with reverence, for in her solitude she carries the myth of our becoming, and in her silence she utters the wordless prophecy that humanity will one day learn to stand whole in itself, free in itself, and love from that wholeness rather than from fear. And in that day, the solitary woman will no longer be anomaly. She will be recognized as pioneer, and her truth will be seen for what it always was, the truth of the self revealed through the life of one who dared to walk alone.